Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I drop my kid off at school and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It is Friday, November 15th, and we're enjoying a crisp, wintry day here in suburban Chicagoland. I'm recording an episode that I'm planning to release early next week, so a little out of order, which means that I've got a couple already recorded that will come out later. So if you notice some time shifting, well, that's on purpose. Because I had a listener comment in the forum that I think deserves some commentary, and given that we are approaching the holiday season, I wanted to get my answer up there as soon as possible. So, greetings, Lyle. I'm here to answer your question today. I guess good prep would have meant getting out Lyle's comment and reading it to you directly, but I'm going to paraphrase. Basically, Lyle says what the thread is called Budget Gaming, and basically Lyle says that he would like to have my thoughts on building a game collection while also keeping an eye on your pocketbook. So that's kind of what I'm planning to do today. I did ask if Lyle has a good gaming community around him, and he says he's in a sort of rural area, so that's a little harder. But I am going to offer some advice for any other listeners who do have a bit more access to a shared community. I'm in Chicago, so I have a lot of people around. First, I'll start with a few comments on strategies for acquiring games on the cheap, and then a few games that I think would make good options, depending what kinds of things you're looking to add to your collection. And then a couple games that I think might work, but maybe don't fit in that original list for various reasons. So to start with, my strategies for acquiring games on the cheap. The first angle that I would suggest is to have a wide open perspective of what kind of games you might want to get. The more narrow your choices are for what games you want to get, the less you'll be able to grab a hold of a deal when it comes along. Instead, if you're kind of familiar with lots of different games and the ideas of lots of different games, you can take advantage of sales when you find them in order to get inexpensive games that are maybe really good. They might not be quite as good as the next game on the line, but I have a number of pretty satisfying games that I've gotten for $10 because I was just watching the sales and struck at the right time. The first off would be that attitude, the idea that you don't need to play the newest thing, that there are literally hundreds of games coming out every year, and a lot of them are really good and get very little attention, so they become discounted very quickly. So keeping an eye on reviews, listening to the conversation so that you're familiar with game titles, so that when one comes up, you have some idea where to start. But, hop over to Board Game Geek. You see a good deal on a game, hop over to Board Game Geek. Get used to how their ratings work and see which ratings work for you. If I find a really good deal on a game and it's got an average rating of 7 or more, I'll often get it just because it's got a rating of 7. It's going to be pretty good. A game that's at between 6.5 and 7, I have to have some other motivating factor, generally. But it's worth thinking about in terms of that model. Using online game distributors, especially if you're somewhere where you don't have access to a good local game store, Amazon and Miniature Market are my go-to game stores. Amazon Prime is a service we use for its video content, but it also gets us free shipping on any package we get that comes with the Prime shipping. And that can be a huge deal because there's often game sales that are marked with Amazon Prime, which means the shipping is free. The hardest part about bargain shopping for games in other venues, like, say, Board Game Geek, if you go in the Board Game Geek market, you find a game, looks like a decent deal, and it's on there for $15 or $20, you got to remember you're going to pay at least another $10 to ship it, probably more. So that game that's on Board Game Geek for $10 is really $20, $25. It's a big game. So make sure that you're keeping track of shipping when you start looking at used markets. That said, the used market is the best place to find games. If you aren't real picky about the condition they're in, trading games with people or using the used market to acquire games that are a little less popular is really a good way to go. Along those lines, I would say trading, if you need to do it through the mail, you can't go local. Trading is really your best bet. Once you have a couple dozen games, you have more than you're going to be playing regularly. So you may have some games that you get tired of, at which point then you can seek trades. Now, I will admit the trading system on BoardGameGeek is not ideal. It's often hard to find a good match. People are often incredibly mercenary about trades, so it takes some patience. But when you're able to find a trade, then you just pay the shipping cost of your game to them, and so you're getting a new game for $10 or $15. And if it's a game you're really interested in, that's a good way to go. The last bargain shopping optional offer, again, is difficult to do in a rural area, but it's possible, or it becomes a mentality. And that's to keep an eye on charity shops, Goodwills, Salvation Armies, local thrift stores, vintage shops. Basically, anytime I go by one of those, if I have time, I stop and I go in and I look. And 9 times out of 10 or 19 times out of 20, I don't find anything worthwhile. But it's, a 2 or 3 minute stop. On the other hand, when I do find stuff, it can be really great. I found copies of Machi Koro, Perudo. Buddy of mine found 2 different copies of Ink and Gold, which I'll mention Ink and Gold in a few minutes again. I just got the starter box for Star Wars Destiny, which my local game store is selling for $30, and I got it for $2. So if you keep an eye on those stores, often you'll find nothing, but every now and again you'll find something really great. My best find was a copy of Napoleon in Europe, a Glenn Drover game, unpunched. I was able to sell it on BoardGameGeek for $60, which then funded me getting other games that I did want. So just kind of keeping an eye on those stores. Most of the time you'll find nothing, but it becomes a kind of delightful hunt. So those are my strategies broadly for looking for low-cost games. At the same time, sometimes we just want to buy a game. You don't want to have to put in all that time and effort to maybe get a thing that wouldn't be what you picked anyway. So I want to talk a little bit today about what are some games you should pick. There are also some comments on the forum, so I'd recommend anybody listening who's interested in this topic, head over to our forum and add your ideas. So read the ideas that are there. And by the time this comes out, these ideas may have been offered already, so nod to the people who mentioned them ahead. I think someone already mentioned one of them already, but okay. So for group games with interesting interaction, but fairly competitive, I would recommend the Uwe Rosenberg game Bonanza. This is a card game. It involves growing beans, so the theme is pretty dumb. But it is unlike almost any other game you play. It's very replayable because most of the action comes from the interaction between the players. And it involves a lot of give and take, a lot of negotiation. It makes for a really fun game. It has a similar vibe to something like Sheriff of Nottingham, except there's no lying. So that I would highly recommend that. That's Bonanza, Bohnanza. It's a pun on the word bean, which is bone in German. Another game that works really well is a short game that we take to coffee shops and that sort of thing is Love Letter. They also have a Batman variant, Love Letter Batman, which is pretty good. This is a micro game, so it's a very small footprint, a very small number of cards, easy to play, quick to teach. Takes about a half an hour if you play the full game, but we rarely play the full game. We just play a couple hands till dinner comes or whatever. But that game has gotten as much play as almost anything in our shelves. So that's Love Letter. If you're interested in a push your luck game, our family really likes Dead Man's Draw. Now, Dead Man's Draw was originally released in a small box game, and it had a pretty low price point. And then they re-released it in a slightly bigger one, bigger box with a slightly higher price point, I think. So I suspect it's $25 or $30 to buy now. But if you're looking at Amazon, it might be cheaper. And if you can find the older game, that should be really inexpensive. It's a push your luck game where you are trying to get points by laying out cards, and you keep going until you repeat a card, and then you bust. So you can try to go for lots of cards, but if you repeat, you're out. Like all push your luck games, though, sometimes you just get beat up by the luck. For two-person games, I would recommend Lost Cities. Lost Cities is a pretty competitive two-player game in which you are laying out sets of cards and you're trying to score them. You have to get a certain number in a set in order to proceed to the next level. In a similar way, I would say another two-person game that's not nearly so competitive, but about the same price, is Patchwork. Another Uwe Rosenberg game. This is about making quilts, and it has interesting decisions to make throughout the game, and a relatively low price point. A couple more. Most of these games I'm suggesting here are card games because one of the big factors in price, or one of the big things that reflects price, is box size. So I'm suggesting a lot of small box games because they come with relatively small prices. If you are interested in deck building, I would recommend Dale of Merchants. Dale of Merchants is a very small box deck building game that has a unique twist. It's a deck construction and then deck destruction game. So at the beginning of the game, you start with some cards, you buy more cards, and then when you play the cards, they give you effects. But you can either play them for their effects or you can put them in stalls. And the way the stalls work, these become the element that allows you to win the game. You have to have a certain number of stalls, and it's been a while since I played, so I don't recall exactly. But the big thing is, to put the card in the stall, you're taking it out of your deck. So you have these really good cards that you're using, but as long as you keep using them, you're not building your stalls, which means you're not moving toward the end of the game. So there's an interesting push-pull where you're getting rid of cards and buying cards at the same time. That's Dale of Merchants. They also have Dale of Merchants 2, and then he just released a Dale of Merchants collection, which is a big box that holds both Dale of Merchants and Dale of Merchants 2 and a bunch of new stuff. And I don't know if he's going to release the new stuff as a separate small box or not. It's kind of annoying if he doesn't, because the people who bought the first two games, then the only way to get it is to buy the big box. Maybe they don't want the big box, but so be it. If you're interested in auction games, I would recommend Vault Wars. Vault Wars is an auction game from Floodgate Games, the people who made Sagrada, and it did not do very well, so the prices are relatively low. And the theme is very strange, which essentially is when heroes go adventuring, they come back with a bunch of loot, then they have to rent a vault to keep their loot in. Then they go away adventuring again, and they never come back. And now the owners of the vault are auctioning off the stuff that's in the vault. It's basically Storage Wars, the fantasy card game. It's a really interesting game because it's an auction mechanism. You're trying to get the most points based on semi-blind bidding or semi-blind lots, where sometimes you know everything that's in the lot, but usually you don't. So you're trying to decide what to bid on and how much to spend and that sort of thing. It's an interesting game. It runs a little long, though. If you're looking at social deduction, like a collaborative group game, I recommend Avalon. In case I guess I didn't say prices. All of these games retail at $20 or under. A lot of them are $15 or $10 on Amazon. So and that's with Prime. So you should be able to get any one of these games relatively inexpensively. The other thing I like about Miniature Market, now that I'm thinking about it, is that they have a hold system, and I think Cool Stuff does that too. Which Lyle might want to look at Cool Stuff because he lives in Florida. A hold system allows you to buy a game like when it's on sale and put it on hold, and then when you've got enough stuff to meet that minimum free shipping requirement, you can tell them to send all the things you have on hold. It works pretty well. I've read online a couple people who talk about doing that, and then when they go to get a hold, there was a screw up in the inventory and there's no game for them. Whatever. That happens sometimes and it's a bummer, but it's never happened to me. So I've had pretty good experience with that. Okay, so back to the recommendations. Avalon is the best social deduction game there is, I think. It's a good mix of clues and information that allows you to try to figure out who's on which team. It's got some interesting special roles. No one gets out during the game. Everybody's in for the whole game. It doesn't last too long unless the group lets it last a long time. And the theme is fun. King Arthur, Merlin, etc., etc. So Avalon would be my recommendation for a social deduction game. Another fun one that's relatively small box is Burke's Gambit, B-U-R-K-E, Burke's. And that is sort of loosely themed around Alien. And it plays up to 8 or 10, maybe 12. But it plays well at like 4, which is different from Avalon. You have to have 5 at least. So it's also shorter. Burke's Gambit is about a 20-minute game versus something like Avalon is generally going to be about an hour. So strongly recommend either of those. And then finally, if you're looking for something a little more meaty, like a game that's going to really get your brain going, I would recommend the Carl Chudyk card games, either Motainai or Innovation. In this case, Innovation is probably my bigger recommendation. Now, one thing is, Innovation, depending which version you get, and the Asmati Games version is the most common one. It's sort of a beige box with a looks like an old-timey wallpaper pattern on it. These games are ugly. The graphic design on them is really mediocre. It looks like it was done in Microsoft Paint, which, no offense to people using Microsoft Paint, but I expect my games to be designed a bit more nicely. That said, I think that's part of why it's so cheap. But it's a really deep game with lots going on and plays really well with 2. I know you can play up to 4 with it. I can't imagine playing it at 4. It seems like it would be bonkers, but really fun. That said, if you've never explored Carl Chudyk games at all, you should read about them a little bit. They are really, really swingy, and most of the games involve in Innovation, it generally involves trying to get a really powerful combo and then run it as quickly as you can while the other people try to dismantle it. So it is definitely a pretty antagonistic game, but super interesting. And the heaviest of the games that I've suggested here. If you remember back last month, I did the series on depth versus complexity. I would say Innovation is both, let's see, I don't know if I want to call it high complexity. Yes, I'm going to say high complexity, high depth. It is really a very deep game with lots going on. So you have to really pay attention to the rules to understand how the game works. But really interesting. Motainai, actually, I like better, but is harder to find and a bit more expensive. And really only plays 2 unless you get the deluxe set that plays 4. So those are my thoughts for small box games, which I think you could pick up on a budget. And each of them is eminently replayable. I have them all in my collection, and I don't plan to get rid of any of them. But I thought here at the end I would mention a few games that occurred to me, but weren't in that small box recommendation, mostly because I tried to keep that to games that I have. So I did have a couple other recommendations if you get the chance. The first one is a game originally called Diamant, but then was re-released as Ink and Gold. And this is probably my favorite push your luck game. Yeah, I mentioned Dead Man's Draw a little earlier. I have Dead Man's Draw. I don't have a copy of Ink and Gold. But boy, I wouldn't mind having it. It is a great game. Fun to play. Everyone's in the whole time, even though often by the last round you can tell you've lost. But still, it's fun. It's a push your luck game where you decide how long you want to stay in the temple. And if you turn around by yourself, you can pick up some extra treasure on the way out. If you turn around at the same time as someone else, then no one gets the treasure, or you split it, and so on. So it's a really interesting game. Definitely worth checking out. Ink and Gold, or the older version, Diamant. I've heard the Diamant version is actually nicer, but Ink and Gold is the one that's widely available now and would be the one that's inexpensive. Another game that I've heard nothing but great things about and have been meaning to play because we have a copy at Toggle Gaming is Fleet. Fleet is a game about fishing ships. So taking ships out, going fishing with them, and so on. So it is a card game. I think it's 2-player. It might be more. But you're getting contracts. You're going fishing. I think it's about like Alaskan fishing charters. And it's just supposed to be very, very good. The designers, Pinchback and, let's see, Matt Riddle and Ben Pinchback. That Fleet was their first game. It sort of splashed really big and gave them legs in the industry, and they've done a number of other really interesting games. We have the Back to the Future card game, which is poorly themed but really good. I like it a lot, and actually just mentioning it here makes me itch to play it. So Fleet would be one I'd recommend you try. I can't endorse it fully because I haven't played it. The same goes for another one I hear nothing but great things about, and that is Oh My Goods. Oh My Goods is a really interesting deck building game with a narrative component. At least the follow-ups have a narrative component. And again, nothing but good things have I heard about that. Mentioning Oh My Goods actually reminds me of another small box game, which I got relatively cheaply. I think I got it for $15 shipped from Germany, but I've never seen it available in the US, so I don't know if it's worth wrenching, but it's called Santo Domingo. And it's just it's a trading game where you're spending resources to get points or trying to use resources to get points. And the whole thing is trying to time when you do that compared to when the other players do it. It's really simple, but super fun. So if you get a chance to play Santo Domingo, I'd recommend that. And then I have two slightly larger games, which would be a more expensive initial investment, but I think these are the two games I can think of that have given us, or that could give the most delight. Apologies for the noise. I'm walking by the construction site, but I don't want to stop the podcast. So there it is. So the first one is Ticket to Ride. If you haven't played Ticket to Ride, it's a generally well-regarded gateway game. It's always fun. Every time I play it, I have a good time. And the thing I like about Ticket to Ride is that they have many versions of it, and each version offers you a slightly different experience. When you first buy it, I would recommend buying the European edition, actually, because it comes with these little stations that are really great, and it comes with its own sets of trains and things. You could also buy the normal Ticket to Ride USA map, and that's a great one too, but it doesn't have the stations. And then after that, there are literally half a dozen or more map packs that give you an alternate board with an alternate set of rules, usually one extra set of rules, that just shake up the game a little bit. And those map packs are, again, the cost of one of these small games I was talking about. But if your family already enjoys Ticket to Ride, then getting the map pack and proceeding from there is a really effective way to get more out of the game you already have. Along those lines, the other game I wanted to mention, which is another one I've played a couple times but is not in my collection, is Dominion. So Dominion is the granddaddy of all the deck builders, and it still holds up as a really good game. What makes Dominion worth considering, I would say, is two parts. One, again, like Ticket to Ride, there are many, many expansions. So if you like Dominion, you could get another of the expansions, and then the game becomes replayable sort of exponentially. But the second thing is, because Dominion's been out a long time, the base game is not very expensive compared to a lot of the other big box games. So it's worth considering getting Dominion as a slightly more expensive initial investment if you think it'll be a game that'll pay off for you in the long run. Well, that's what I have as far as ideas for inexpensive games to consider. I think all of the ones that I suggested in that main section would be delightful additions to your collection that should get lots of play and be lots of fun for your group. I look forward to hearing what other members of the community have to say. Pop over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and look for the thread called Budget Gaming if you'd like to add something. Well, that's about it for me. I'm actually circling in my backyard before I go into the house. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye. Dominion is the... oh boy. So, seriously?
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.